In the grand halls of Madrid's Prado Museum, a masterpiece by Diego Velázquez hangs as a testament to both artistic genius and human tragedy. Las Meninas, painted around 1656, is one of the most celebrated works in Western art, its complex composition and enigmatic figures drawing millions of viewers each year. At its heart stands a luminous child, her golden hair cascading in soft curls, her elaborate gown shimmering with the opulence of Spanish royalty. Her wide, innocent eyes gaze directly at the viewer, radiating a curious vitality that seems to transcend the canvas. This is Margarita Teresa of Spain, a 5-year-old princess whose delicate beauty masks the horrific destiny awaiting her. Behind that radiant face lies a story not of fairy tale royalty, but of a young girl ensnared by the twisted machinery of dynastic ambition, her life sacrificed to the Habsburg obsession with bloodline purity. This is no tale of romance or regal splendor. It is a chilling account of a child turned into a commodity, her existence shaped by incestuous marriages and political machinations that would ultimately destroy her. Margarita Teresa, born in 1651 into the decaying grandeur of the Spanish Habsburg court, was never destined to live as an individual. From her first breath in the sprawling Alcazar palace, she was a pawn in a game far larger than herself. Her worth measured not by her intelligence or spirit, but by her potential to cement alliances through marriage and childbirth. Her parents, King Philip IV and his niece-wife Mariana of Austria, were products of the same incestuous policies that would define Margarita's fate. The Habsburgs, rulers of vast swaths of Europe, had long relied on strategic marriages to consolidate power, but by the 17th century their obsession with genetic purity had morphed into a grotesque tradition of inbreeding. Uncles married nieces, cousins wed cousins, and the family tree twisted into a tangled vine, producing heirs plagued by physical deformities, mental frailties, and chronic illnesses. The infamous Habsburg jaw, a protruding lower mandible that left some royals struggling to eat or speak, was only the most visible symptom of a dynasty poisoning itself from within. Margarita's story begins in a world of suffocating opulence, where the Spanish Empire, once the mightiest in Europe, was crumbling under the weight of economic collapse, military defeats, and internal decay. The Alcazar, with its gilded halls and endless ceremonies, was a gilded cage for the young princess. Surrounded by courtiers who saw her as a diplomatic asset, she was denied the simple joys of childhood playmates, freedom, or even the right to her own thoughts. Court records reveal a child of remarkable intelligence, quick to learn languages and gifted with artistic talent, yet these qualities only increased her value in the marriage market. By age 10, palace physicians were already examining her body with clinical precision, assessing her reproductive potential as if she were livestock. Her beauty, captured so vividly in Velázquez's brushstrokes, was not a gift but a currency, her innocence a fleeting moment before the Habsburg machine claimed her. The tragedy of Margarita Teresa lies not only in her personal suffering, but in the broader horror of a system that sanctified child exploitation under the guise of divine monarchy. The Habsburgs justified their inbreeding with a toxic blend of superstition, xenophobia, and political expediency, claiming their blood was sacred, untouchable by foreign lineage. Court physicians, aware of the genetic devastation stillborn infants, sickly heirs, and rampant disabilities, remained silent, crafting elaborate defenses of royal purity rather than confronting the truth. While other European dynasties like the Bourbons and Stuarts began to see the folly of extreme inbreeding, the Habsburgs clung stubbornly to their catastrophic tradition, condemning Margarita to a fate that was both predictable and preventable. Velázquez's Las Meninas captures Margarita at the only moment in her life when she was truly free, before the full weight of her destiny descended. The painting is a marvel of composition, with the young princess at its center surrounded by attendants, dwarves, and symbols of royal power. Yet there is something haunting in her gaze, a premature seriousness that hints at her awareness of the role she was born to play. Art historians have long debated the painting's meaning, with some seeing it as a subtle critique of the artificiality of court life, the child trapped in a world of protocol that isolates her from humanity. Velázquez, a court painter with unparalleled access to the royal family, saw Margarita not as a dynastic tool, but as a vibrant individual, her intelligence and spirit shining through the canvas. This vision stands in stark contrast to the cold calculations of the court, where her value lay solely in her womb. By age 11, serious negotiations for Margarita's marriage were underway, her fate sealed in a union with her uncle, Leopold I, Holy Roman Emperor and head of the Austrian Habsburgs. This incestuous match was no anomaly, but a cornerstone of Habsburg policy, designed to keep power within the family at any cost. The Spanish court, desperate to shore up its faltering empire, saw Margarita as a bargaining chip, her beauty and fertility touted in diplomatic exchanges like goods in a marketplace. The marriage contract, finalized when she was 12, set the stage for a proxy wedding at 14, followed by a grueling journey from Madrid to Vienna, where she was paraded before crowds as a living symbol of the Habsburg alliance. Contemporary accounts describe a withdrawn, anxious teenager, her intelligence and charm overshadowed by dread as she approached a life she could scarcely comprehend. Margarita's story is a microcosm of the Habsburg dynasty's decline, a cautionary tale of how absolute power can corrupt even the most intimate human bonds. Her brief life ending at 21 after 6 pregnancies, countless miscarriages, and unimaginable suffering reveals the horrifying cost of treating people as political commodities. Las Meninas immortalizes her not as the empress she became or the broodmare she was forced to be, but as the child she once was, full of potential that was never allowed to flourish. In her gaze, we see both the innocence stolen by dynastic ambition and a silent indictment of a system that valued blood over humanity. This introduction sets the stage for a deeper exploration of Margarita Teresa's life, a tragedy that resonates across centuries as a warning against the sacrifice of innocence for power. Chapter 2. A Princess in a Gilded Cage. The luminous child at the heart of Diego Velázquez's Las Meninas, introduced as a fleeting vision of innocence, was not destined to linger in the innocence of childhood. Margarita Teresa, the golden-haired princess of Spain whose gaze captivated the world, was born into a world where beauty and intelligence were not gifts, but commodities, her life meticulously orchestrated from her first breath. As we leave the Prado Museum and the haunting image of the 5-year-old Margarita, we enter the suffocating opulence of 17th-century Madrid, where the Habsburg dynasty's obsession with bloodline purity and power cast a long shadow over her existence. This chapter traces her early years, from her birth in the Alcazar Palace to the eve of her tragic betrothal, revealing how the cold machinery of dynastic ambition shaped a child into a pawn, her potential stifled by a system that saw her only as a means to an end. The Alcazar, a world of splendor and constraint. On July 12, 1651, the Alcazar Palace in Madrid, a fortress of gilded halls and labyrinthine corridors, welcomed the birth of Margarita Teresa, daughter of King Philip IV, and his second wife, Mariana of Austria. The palace, a symbol of Spanish Habsburg might, was a world of breathtaking grandeur, its walls adorned with tapestries depicting heroic victories, its rooms filled with the scent of incense and the murmur of courtiers. Yet for Margarita, it was a gilded cage, a place where every gesture was governed by protocol, every moment scrutinized for its political utility. Her birth was celebrated not for the arrival of a child, but for the addition of a diplomatic asset, a princess whose future marriage would shore up the crumbling Spanish Empire. Philip Thor, at 46, was an aging monarch burdened by a reign marked by military defeats and economic collapse. His marriage to Mariana, his 22-year-old niece and the daughter of his sister, Maria Anna, was itself a product of the Habsburgs' incestuous marriage strategy, designed to keep power within the family. This union, like so many before it, was less about love than about consolidating territories and maintaining the myth of Habsburg bloodline purity. Margarita, born of this uncle-niece pairing, inherited a genetic legacy fraught with danger, her DNA a concentrated cocktail of Habsburg lineage that carried the seeds of the dynasty's eventual downfall. From her earliest days, Margarita was surrounded by a court that viewed her through a lens of political calculation. Court chronicles describe her as a strikingly beautiful infant, with pale skin, golden curls, and the distinctive Habsburg features, a slightly pronounced lower lip, and a delicate, almost ethereal complexion. These traits, so vividly captured in Velázquez's later portraits, were not merely aesthetic. They were markers of her value in the marriage market. Palace officials began discussing potential suitors before she could walk, analyzing which alliance would best serve Spain's desperate need for stability. Her mother, Mariana, herself a product of Habsburg marriage politics, understood the brutal reality awaiting her daughter, but was powerless to change it, her own life shaped by the same dynastic imperatives. A childhood under surveillance. Margarita's childhood was anything but carefree. The Spanish court was a place of rigid ceremony, where even a princess's daily life was governed by rules designed to maintain royal dignity and distance. She was never permitted to play with common children, lest their influence taint her carefully curated upbringing. Her interactions were limited to carefully vetted courtiers and attendants, many of whom reported her every word and gesture to palace officials. Court records reveal a child whose meals, lessons, and even sleep were documented with obsessive precision, each detail analyzed for its impact on her suitability as a future bride. Despite this stifling environment, Margarita displayed a remarkable vitality and intelligence. Contemporary accounts note her ability to learn languages quickly, mastering Spanish, German, and Latin with ease, a skill cultivated not for her own enrichment but to prepare her for a foreign court. She showed a natural talent for music and drawing, often sketching scenes from the palace gardens or imitating the court musicians' melodies. These glimpses of her personality, preserved in letters from her governesses, paint a picture of a spirited child yearning for expression. Yet her talents were subordinated to her primary role, becoming an impeccable royal bride. Velázquez's portraits, particularly Las Meninas, offer a window into Margarita's early years, capturing not only her beauty but also a haunting undercurrent of melancholy. In the painting, she stands at the center of a meticulously staged scene, surrounded by maids of honor, dwarves, and a dog, her gaze direct and unflinching. Art historians have noted the unusual composition, with Margarita appearing almost isolated despite the crowd around her, a subtle commentary on the artificiality of her world. The artist, a close observer of the royal family, saw in her a spark of individuality that the court sought to extinguish, her curious eyes hinting at a mind that questioned the role she was forced to play. Education for a dynastic purpose. Margarita's education was a carefully calibrated process, designed not to nurture her intellect but to mold her into a diplomatic tool. Her tutors, among the most learned scholars in Spain, focused heavily on languages, particularly German, as it was widely assumed she would marry into the Austrian branch of the Habsburgs. She was taught to read and write in Latin, the language of diplomacy in the Church, ensuring she could navigate the complex correspondence of a foreign court. Her lessons in history emphasized Habsburg lineage, instilling a sense of divine duty to preserve the family's sacred bloodline, a doctrine that justified the incestuous marriages that would define her life. Religious instruction played a central role in her upbringing, but it was tailored to political ends. Margarita was trained in the austere Catholicism favored by the Austrian Habsburgs, her prayers emphasizing submission, sacrifice, and the divine right of kings. These lessons were not about spiritual growth, but about preparing her to accept her role as a reproductive vessel, her personal desires irrelevant in the face of dynastic necessity. Her spiritual advisors, often Jesuit priests with ties to the court, reinforced the idea that her suffering, whether in marriage or childbirth, was a holy offering to God and the empire. Physical education was equally utilitarian, focused on cultivating the grace and poise expected of a Habsburg princess. Margarita learned to dance the intricate steps of courtly dances, to ride horses with regal dignity, and to carry herself with an air of untouchable majesty. Yet her body was also subjected to rigid controls, with court physicians imposing dietary restrictions to maintain her health for future childbearing. These measures, rooted in medieval medical theories, often did more harm than good, leaving her frail and prone to illness even in childhood. Most disturbingly, Margarita's physical development was monitored with clinical detachment. From age 10, palace physicians conducted regular examinations to assess her reproductive potential, their reports preserved in court archives with chilling detail. These documents discuss her body in purely functional terms, predicting her fertility and estimating her capacity to bear children. The examinations, conducted with the cold efficiency of livestock breeding, stripped her of dignity, reducing her to a biological asset long before she could understand the implications. The weight of dynastic expectations. As Margarita grew, the Spanish court intensified its efforts to prepare her for her inevitable role. By age 11, serious marriage negotiations were underway, with the Austrian Habsburgs emerging as the preferred ally. The Spanish Empire, reeling from losses in the 30 Years' War and economic collapse, desperately needed the Austrian alliance to maintain its influence in Europe. Philip IV's male heir, Prince Philip Prospero, was sickly and unlikely to survive, making Margarita's potential offspring critical to the dynasty's survival. She was no longer a child, but a linchpin in a fragile political strategy. The court's obsession with Margarita's future was matched by its indifference to her present. She was rarely allowed to form close friendships, as any attachment might complicate her eventual departure. Her governesses, tasked with enforcing strict discipline, discouraged displays of emotion, training her to suppress her fears and desires. Court records describe moments of quiet rebellion, a refusal to eat a prescribed meal, a whispered complaint about her lessons. But these were swiftly corrected, her individuality eroded by the relentless pressure to conform. Velázquez's later portraits of Margarita, painted as she approached her teens, reveal a subtle shift in her demeanor. The vibrant curiosity of Las Meninas gives way to a more guarded expression, her eyes shadowed by a premature seriousness. These images, commissioned to showcase her marriageability, inadvertently capture the toll of her upbringing. Her beauty tinged with a fragility that hints at the suffering to come. The artist, perhaps aware of her fate, imbued these portraits with a quiet dignity, preserving her humanity in a way the court never did. The shadow of incestuous destiny. The Habsburgs' marriage strategy, rooted in the belief that their blood was divinely ordained, had by the 17th century become a genetic disaster. Margarita's parents were only the latest in a long line of incestuous unions, their marriage producing siblings who suffered from severe health problems. Her half-brother, Charles II, born after her, would become the most infamous example of Habsburg inbreeding, his physical and mental disabilities rendering him unfit to rule. Margarita, though outwardly healthy, carried the same genetic risks, her future children destined to inherit the dynasty's accumulated frailties. Court physicians, aware of the dangers, dared not challenge royal policy. Instead, they crafted elaborate justifications for inbreeding, claiming foreign marriages would dilute the divine essence of Habsburg blood. These arguments, steeped in superstition and xenophobia, ignored the mounting evidence of stillbirths, deformities, and early deaths. The Spanish court, clinging to a fading vision of imperial glory, convinced itself that Margarita's marriage to her uncle, Leopold I, would somehow escape the curse that plagued their lineage. By 1663, when Margarita was 12, the marriage contract with Leopold was finalized, setting the stage for a proxy wedding at 14. The negotiations, conducted with the precision of a livestock trade, focused on dowries, territorial concessions, and guarantees of her fertility. Spanish diplomats emphasized her beauty and intelligence, while Austrian envoys demanded assurances of her health. At no point was Margarita consulted, her feelings irrelevant in the face of dynastic necessity. The agreement specified that she would depart for Vienna at 14, her childhood effectively over before it had truly begun. A child on the brink of tragedy. As Margarita approached her betrothal, the Spanish court redoubled its efforts to prepare her for her role. She received intensive instruction in Austrian customs, Habsburg history, and the expectations of her future husband. These lessons emphasized her primary duty, producing male heirs regardless of the personal cost. Palace astrologers calculated auspicious dates for her wedding and consummation, while physicians continued their invasive examinations, predicting her reproductive timeline with chilling detachment. Contemporary accounts describe a young girl increasingly withdrawn, her natural charisma dimmed by the weight of her destiny. She reportedly spent long hours in the palace chapel, praying for strength to fulfill her duties, her faith a fragile shield against the fear that consumed her. Her mother, Mariana, offered what comfort she could, but their relationship was strained by the knowledge that Margarita's fate mirrored her own, a life of submission to Habsburg ambition. The final months before her departure were a whirlwind of preparation, with seamstresses crafting elaborate gowns and jewelers designing ornaments to showcase her status. Yet these trappings of royalty could not mask the reality. A child was being sold into a marriage that would likely kill her, her body and soul offered up to preserve a dying empire. As she stood on the brink of this new chapter, Margarita remained a figure of heartbreaking contradiction, a princess of unparalleled beauty, intelligence, and potential, trapped in a system that valued none of these qualities. This chapter sets the stage for the next phase of Margarita's life, her journey to Vienna and the brutal realities of her marriage to Leopold I. The seeds of her tragedy, sown in the Alcazar's gilded halls, would bear fruit in the Austrian court, where the Habsburg obsession with bloodline purity would push her to the breaking point. Her story, linked to the innocent child of Las Meninas, is a stark reminder of the human cost of absolute power, a tale that resonates across centuries as a warning against the sacrifice of innocence for political gain. Chapter 3. A Bride in a Foreign Land. The gilded cage of Madrid's Alcazar Palace, where Margarita Teresa spent her childhood under the watchful eyes of courtiers and physicians, was but a prelude to the harsher realities awaiting her. As described in the previous chapter, the young princess, immortalized in Velázquez's Las Meninas as a luminous child, was molded from birth into a diplomatic asset. Her intelligence and beauty subordinated to the Habsburg dynasty's obsession with bloodline purity. By age 12, her fate was sealed with a marriage contract to her uncle, Leopold Cercerc, Holy Roman Emperor, a union designed to cement the faltering alliance between the Spanish and Austrian Habsburgs. This chapter follows Margarita's harrowing transition from a tightly controlled childhood in Spain to her role as a teenage empress in Vienna, where the weight of dynastic expectations, particularly the relentless demand for heirs, would crush her spirit and body. Her journey from Madrid to Vienna, her marriage, and the brutal cycle of pregnancies that defined her brief life reveal the full extent of the Habsburg system's cruelty, transforming a vibrant girl into a tragic figure sacrificed on the altar of imperial ambition. The proxy wedding and the road to Vienna. In April 1666, the Alcazar Palace, with its opulent halls and stifling protocols, hosted a ceremony that marked the end of Margarita's childhood. At 14, she stood pale and silent in a gown of silver brocade, its weight almost unbearable, as she participated in a proxy wedding to Leopold I. The Austrian ambassador, standing in for the absent groom, recited vows that bound her to a man she had never met, her uncle by blood and a stranger by circumstance. Court records describe her as a figure of quiet resignation, her eyes downcast, her voice barely audible as she repeated the words that sealed her fate. The ceremony, steeped in Catholic ritual and Habsburg pomp, was less a celebration than a transaction, a public affirmation of the alliance between Spain and Austria. For Margarita, it was the moment her childhood was officially relinquished, her identity reduced to that of a bride-to-be, a vessel for the dynasty's future. The journey from Madrid to Vienna was a grueling, months-long ordeal, a procession designed to showcase the might of the Habsburg alliance, accompanied by a vast entourage of Spanish nobles, servants, and guards. Margarita was paraded through European cities like a prized artifact, her beauty and youth displayed to curious crowds. Contemporary accounts note her increasing withdrawal during the journey, her once sparkling eyes dulled by anxiety. In letters to her mother, Mariana, she confessed her fear of the unknown, her words tinged with a longing for the familiar confines of the Alcazar, oppressive though they were. Foreign diplomats who glimpsed her at stops along the route remarked on her intelligence and grace, but also on her palpable apprehension, a teenager thrust into a role she could scarcely comprehend. The journey was not merely a physical transition, but a psychological one, stripping Margarita of the last vestiges of her Spanish identity. She was coached in Austrian etiquette, her Spanish attendants gradually replaced by Austrian ones, their unfamiliar accents and customs deepening her sense of isolation. The elaborate gowns she wore, meant to symbolize her status, became a metaphor for her entrapment, their heavy fabrics and intricate designs weighing her down as she approached her new life. By the time she reached Vienna on December 5, 1666, she was a shadow of the vibrant child Velázquez had painted, her spirit already battered by the knowledge of what awaited her. Arrival in Vienna, a stranger in a strange court. Vienna greeted Margarita with the spectacle of imperial grandeur. The Austrian court, under Leopold II's command, spared no expense in celebrating the arrival of their new empress. Festivals, parades, and religious ceremonies stretched over weeks, transforming the city into a stage for Habsburg propaganda. St. Stephen's Cathedral, its Gothic spires piercing the winter sky, hosted the formal wedding on December 12, 1666. Margarita, now barely 15, stood beside Leopold, a man 12 years her senior, in a gown that dwarfed her slight frame. Witnesses described Leopold as courteous but distant, his demeanor shaped by the same dynastic imperatives that had brought them together. Margarita, trained to perfection in royal protocol, performed her role with mechanical precision, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear, a silent plea lost amid the cathedral's echoing hymns. The Austrian court was a world apart from the Alcazar, its customs colder, its language a rapid, unfamiliar German that left Margarita struggling to keep up. Her Spanish retainers, a small lifeline to her homeland, were gradually marginalized, their presence resented by Austrian courtiers eager to assert control over the young empress. Margarita found herself adrift in a sea of unfamiliar faces, her attempts at conversation hampered by linguistic and cultural barriers. Letters to her mother reveal her homesickness, her descriptions of Vienna's gray skies and austere palaces contrasting sharply with the warm hues of Madrid. She clung to her Spanish maids, who whispered familiar lullabies and shared stories of home, but even they could not shield her from the court's relentless demands. Leopold, at 26, was a complex figure, kind in his way, but wholly a product of the Habsburg system. Contemporary accounts suggest he treated Margarita with formal respect, even developing a cautious affection for her, but his primary concern was her roles as a producer of heirs. The Austrian court, aware of the Spanish succession crisis and the fragility of their alliance, wasted no time in pressing Margarita to fulfill her reproductive duties. Court ladies, many themselves veterans of arranged marriages, monitored her every move, regulating her diet, sleep, and social interactions with an efficiency that bordered on cruelty. These women, tasked with ensuring her fertility, showed little sympathy for her youth or her obvious distress, their loyalty to the dynasty overriding any human compassion. The crushing weight of reproductive duty Margarita's life as empress began with an immediate and unrelenting expectation: to conceive and bear children, preferably male heirs, to secure the Habsburg lineage. Palace physicians, echoing the invasive examinations of her childhood, began monthly inspections of her body, tracking her menstrual cycle with clinical detachment. Their reports, preserved in Austrian archives, discuss her in terms of biological function, her emotional and psychological well-being dismissed as irrelevant. The pressure was immense, compounded by the knowledge that her half-brother, Charles II of Spain, was unlikely to produce heirs, making her potential sons critical to the dynasty's survival. In early 1667, less than 3 months after her arrival, Margarita's first pregnancy was announced, a development celebrated by the court as proof of the marriage's success. Yet for the 15-year-old empress, the news brought terror rather than joy. Court records describe her as increasingly anxious, her frail frame ill-equipped for the physical demands of pregnancy. The Austrian court, adhering to medieval medical practices, subjected her to a regimen of strict discipline, controlling her diet, limiting her movement, and prescribing herbal concoctions that often caused more harm than good. Bloodletting, A common treatment believed to balance bodily humors left her weakened, her pale complexion growing ghostly under the strain. The pregnancy ended in tragedy in late 1667 with a miscarriage after 7 months. The loss devastated Margarita, both physically and emotionally, her body racked by pain and her spirit broken by grief. The court's response was chillingly pragmatic. Rather than allowing her time to recover, physicians recommended immediate efforts to conceive again, arguing that her youth made her resilient. This marked the beginning of a brutal cycle that would define her remaining years. Pregnancy, loss, brief recovery, and renewed pressure to conceive. The court treated each miscarriage as a logistical setback, not a human tragedy, their focus fixed on the production of heirs rather than Margarita's survival. A cycle of loss and despair. Margarita's second pregnancy, beginning in early 1668, was marked by even greater medical scrutiny. Physicians, desperate to avoid another miscarriage, subjected her to treatments that ranged from ineffective to dangerous forced bed rest, foul-tasting tonics, and repeated bloodletting. The court's obsession with her reproductive output left no room for her emotional needs, her growing melancholy dismissed as a feminine weakness. In November 1668, she delivered a stillborn daughter, the loss plunging her into a deeper state of despair. Court records note her withdrawal, her once vibrant personality dulled by grief. Yet the physicians' reports focused solely on when she might conceive again, their language devoid of empathy. By 69, Margarita's health was visibly deteriorating, her body weakened by repeated pregnancies and her mind frayed by isolation. She became increasingly dependent on her Spanish retainers who formed a small enclave of familiarity in the alien court. Yet even this comfort was fleeting, as Austrian courtiers pressured her to assimilate, viewing her Spanish ties as a threat to their control. Her third pregnancy, beginning in 1669, brought a rare moment of hope when she gave birth to a daughter, Maria Antonia, in January 1670. The court celebrated the birth as a triumph, but the joy was short-lived. Margarita's difficult delivery left her bedridden for weeks, her body struggling to recover from the strain. The pressure to produce a male heir resumed almost immediately, with physicians declaring her fit for another pregnancy despite clear signs of exhaustion. The relentless cycle continued with a fourth pregnancy in late 1670, marked by complications from the outset. Severe morning sickness, persistent bleeding, and fainting spells alarmed even the callous court physicians. Yet political necessity trumped medical concern. The pregnancy ended in another miscarriage in mid-1671, leaving Margarita physically shattered and emotionally broken. Court records describe her as melancholic and frail, her once lively spirit replaced by a haunted resignation. Modern historians, analyzing these accounts, suggest she suffered from severe depression, possibly compounded by post-traumatic stress, yet the court's only response was to push for another pregnancy. The final descent. By 1672, Margarita's fifth pregnancy began under a cloud of foreboding. Her health, already fragile, deteriorated rapidly with chronic pain and infections signaling her body's collapse. Palace physicians, under pressure from both Austrian and Spanish courts, focused on preserving the pregnancy rather than her life, administering treatments that exacerbated her suffering. Letters from her Spanish maids reveal a young woman who knew she was dying, her prayers filled with pleas for her homeland and her daughter. Leopold, torn between his affection for his wife and his dynastic obligations, spent long hours at her bedside, but his power as emperor could not override the system that demanded her sacrifice. In the fall of 1672, Margarita's condition became critical, with persistent bleeding and severe pain rendering her bedridden. The court, aware of her impending death, continued to prioritize the pregnancy, their records filled with cold calculations about the potential heir. On March 12, 1673, Margarita went into premature labor, the delivery catastrophic for both mother and child. At 21, she died in agony, the stillborn infant in her womb marking the final tragedy of a life spent in service to Habsburg ambition. Palace accounts describe a scene of horror, with courtiers more concerned about the political fallout than the human loss before them. The aftermath and legacy. Margarita's death was met with chilling indifference by the courts that had shaped her fate. Leopold, visibly shaken, was quickly urged to remarry, his advisors already negotiating for a new bride to continue the reproductive work Margarita could not complete. The Spanish court, focused on the failure of the alliance, mourned not the loss of a daughter, but the loss of a political asset. Her lavish funeral in Vienna, a spectacle of Habsburg power, served as a final act of exploitation. Her death used to bolster the dynasty's image rather than honor her memory. Yet Margarita's story, linked to the child in Las Meninas and the suffocating childhood described in the previous chapter, resonates beyond her tragic end. Her life illuminates the cruelty of a system that reduced a vibrant, intelligent girl to a reproductive tool, her suffering a microcosm of the Habsburg dynasty's self-inflicted collapse. The genetic disasters born of inbreeding, evident in her daughter Maria Antonia's own tragic fate, would contribute to the dynasty's downfall, culminating in the War of Spanish Succession. Margarita's legacy, preserved in Velázquez's masterpiece, serves as a haunting reminder of the human cost of absolute power. Her gaze, a silent rebuke to the system that destroyed her. Chapter 4. The Cost of Dynastic Ambition. The tragic arc of Margarita Teresa's life, from the radiant child in Velázquez's Las Meninas to the frail empress consumed by the Habsburgs' relentless demands, reached its devastating climax in Vienna, as detailed in the previous chapter. Her death at 21, after a catastrophic premature labor in March 1673, marked the end of a life defined by sacrifice, her body and spirit broken by the dynasty's obsession with bloodline purity. Yet the story of Margarita does not end with her passing. This chapter explores the immediate aftermath of her death, the cold pragmatism of the Habsburg courts, and the broader consequences of her tragic life, which reverberated through the decline of the Spanish Empire and the eventual collapse of the Habsburg dynasty. Through her daughter, Maria Antonia, and the enduring legacy of Las Meninas, Margarita's story became a powerful symbol of the human cost of absolute power, a cautionary tale that exposed the futility and cruelty of a system that valued lineage over life. The aftermath, a dynasty's indifference. Margarita Teresa's death in the Hofburg Palace was a moment of profound horror, yet the Austrian court's response was chillingly detached. Palace records describe a scene of chaos and agony, with the young empress writhing in pain as physicians struggled to save the unborn child, their efforts focused on the potential heir rather than the dying mother. When both Margarita and her stillborn infant succumbed, the court's attention shifted immediately to the political implications. Rather than mourning the loss of a young woman who had endured unimaginable suffering, courtiers and advisors began discussing Leopold II's need for a new wife, their calculations as cold as the marble halls of Vienna. Leopold, now 26 and visibly shaken by his wife's death, was described by contemporaries as retreating into solitude, spending hours in prayer at St. Stephen's Cathedral. Yet his grief, however genuine, was overshadowed by dynastic necessity. Within weeks, his advisors were negotiating with European courts to secure a new bride, one who could continue the reproductive work Margarita had been unable to complete. The speed of these negotiations, her body barely cold before marriage talks resumed, underscored the Habsburgs' view of women as disposable tools, their value measured solely by their ability to produce heirs. Leopold's subsequent marriages, first to Claudia Felicitas of Tyrol and later to Eleanor Magdalene of Neuburg, produced children. But the genetic frailties of the Habsburg line persisted, a grim legacy of the inbreeding policy that had claimed Margarita. In Madrid, the Spanish court's reaction was equally callous. King Philip IV had died in 1665, leaving Margarita's mother, Mariana of Austria, as regent for the sickly Charles II, Margarita's half-brother. News of her daughter's death elicited no recorded outpouring of maternal grief. Instead, court correspondence focused on the failure of the Austrian alliance to secure the Spanish succession. Margarita, once celebrated as a diplomatic triumph, was quickly forgotten, her sacrifice deemed a regrettable but necessary cost of empire. Spanish officials turned their attention to alternative strategies, seeking new alliances to bolster their crumbling power, their indifference to Margarita's suffering a stark reflection of the system that had shaped her life. Her funeral in Vienna was a spectacle of Habsburg grandeur, a weeks-long display of opulence designed to reaffirm the dynasty's prestige rather than honor the woman who had died in its service. The cortege wound through Vienna's streets, with black-draped carriages and tolling bells, while masses were held in every major church. The cost of these ceremonies, documented in court ledgers, was staggering, a final act of exploitation that used Margarita's death to project an image of imperial strength. Yet behind the pomp lay a bitter truth. The Habsburgs had squandered one of their brightest jewels, her life extinguished for a cause that was already doomed. The succession crisis and the Habsburg decline. Margarita's death was not merely a personal tragedy, but a pivotal moment in the decline of the Habsburg dynasty. Her failure to produce a male heir exacerbated the Spanish succession crisis, which had loomed over her entire life. Her half-brother, Charles II, was the last Spanish Habsburg king, a tragic figure whose severe physical and mental disabilities, products of generations of inbreeding, rendered him incapable of ruling effectively or producing heirs. Known as El Hechizado, the Bewitched, Charles's reign was marked by political paralysis and economic collapse, his court a battleground for rival factions vying for control. Margarita's only surviving child, Maria Antonia, born in 1670, became a critical figure in the succession drama. At 15, she was married to Maximilian II Emmanuel of Bavaria, another strategic union aimed at preserving Habsburg influence. Like her mother, Maria Antonia endured difficult pregnancies, her health undermined by the same genetic frailties that had plagued Margarita. She died young, leaving behind a son, Joseph Ferdinand, who briefly emerged as a candidate for the Spanish throne. His death in 1699, at age 6, extinguished the last hope of a direct Habsburg heir, setting the stage for the War of Spanish Succession, 1701-1714, a brutal conflict that reshaped European power dynamics and ended Habsburg rule in Spain. The war, triggered by Charles II's death in 1700, was a direct consequence of the dynasty's genetic and political failures. European powers, including France, Austria, and England, fought over the Spanish throne, with the Bourbon Philip V ultimately prevailing. The Habsburgs' obsession with inbreeding, epitomized by Margarita's marriage to her uncle, had created a dynasty of invalids, their bloodline purity a hollow victory that led to their downfall. Modern genetic studies of Habsburg remains, including those of Charles II, reveal a level of inbreeding so severe that it caused widespread congenital defects, confirming what court physicians had long suspected but dared not voice. The cultural and philosophical impact. Margarita's tragic life, though quickly forgotten by the courts that exploited her, left a lasting mark on European thought. Her story, preserved in court records in Velázquez's Las Meninas, became a potent symbol for Enlightenment philosophers who critiqued the excesses of absolute monarchy. Thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau pointed to the Habsburgs' inbreeding as evidence of the irrationality of divine right rule, arguing that systems that sacrificed human welfare for political gain were inherently flawed. Margarita's fate, reduced to a reproductive tool at 14, exposed the moral bankruptcy of treating individuals, especially children, as commodities, her suffering a case study in the need for more humane governance. The Habsburgs' downfall, accelerated by the genetic disasters of their marriage policies, challenged the notion of divine monarchy itself. The obvious frailties of Charles II, unable to speak clearly or walk without assistance, made it impossible to sustain the myth of royal superiority. Margarita's death, a precursor to this collapse, provided concrete evidence that the Habsburgs' sacred bloodline was a source of weakness, not strength. Her story, though not widely known in her time, became a cautionary tale for later generations, a warning against the dangers of unchecked power and the dehumanization of those caught in its grasp. The enduring legacy of Las Meninas. While the Habsburg courts discarded Margarita's memory, Velázquez's Las Meninas ensured her immortality, transforming her from a dynastic pawn into an enduring symbol of human dignity. The painting, introduced in Chapter 1 as a masterpiece of Western art, captures Margarita at 5, her gaze a haunting blend of curiosity and melancholy. As discussed in Chapter 2, Velázquez saw her as an individual, not a commodity, his brushstrokes preserving a spark of humanity that the court sought to extinguish. In Chapter 3, we saw how this humanity was crushed by the demands of her marriage and pregnancies, yet the painting remains a testament to what might have been a life of potential cut short by dynastic ambition. Art historians have long analyzed Las Meninas for its technical brilliance and philosophical depth. The painting's unusual composition, with Margarita at the center yet isolated by the figures around her, mirrors the isolation of her life. The mirror in the background, reflecting the unseen king and queen, suggests a world where appearances are manipulated for power, a subtle critique of the court's artificiality. For modern viewers, Margarita's direct gaze is profoundly affecting, her eyes seeming to pierce the centuries with a silent accusation. Knowing her fate, as detailed in Chapter 3, viewers cannot help but see the shadow of tragedy in her innocent face, the painting becoming a memorial to a child who deserved better. The contrast between Margarita's artistic immortality and her historical erasure is profound. The Habsburgs valued her only for her reproductive function, yet history remembers her through Velázquez's vision, which celebrates her individuality. The painting's enduring popularity, drawing millions to the Prado Museum, serves as a quiet rebellion against the system that destroyed her. Each viewer who pauses before her image, captivated by her intelligence and vitality, implicitly acknowledges the tragedy of her life, a posthumous justice that transcends the political calculations of her time. A symbol of systemic abuse, Margarita's story, woven through the chapters of her life, is one of institutionalized abuse, sanctified by law, religion, and tradition. From her childhood in the Alcazar, where she was groomed for sacrifice, to her death in Vienna, where she was pushed beyond her physical limits. She was denied agency, her body and soul subordinated to dynastic goals. The Habsburgs' marriage policies, justified by claims of divine purity, were a form of systemic violence, exploiting young women like Margarita under the guise of necessity. Her 6 pregnancies, countless miscarriages, and early death were not accidents, but the inevitable outcome of a system that prioritized lineage over life. This abuse extended beyond Margarita to countless other women in royal courts, their stories less documented, but no less tragic. Her daughter, Maria Antonia, became another victim, her own life cut short by the same reproductive demands. The Habsburgs' failure to produce viable heirs, culminating in Charles II's sterility, proved the futility of their policies. Yet the human cost measured in lives like Margarita's was incalculable. Her story, linked to the broader narrative of Habsburg decline, forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, consent, and the vulnerability of children in systems designed to serve adult ambitions. A warning across centuries. Margarita Teresa's legacy, as preserved in Las Meninas and the historical record, is a warning that resonates far beyond the 17th century. Her life illuminates the dangers of treating individuals as means to an end, a practice that persists in various forms today, whether in child marriages, forced labor, or other systems that exploit the vulnerable for political or economic gain. The Habsburgs' collapse, driven by the very policies that killed Margarita, underscores the self-destructive nature of such systems, their short-term gains outweighed by long-term ruin. In the context of the previous chapters, Margarita's story is a thread that connects the innocence of her childhood, Chapter 2, to the brutality of her marriage and death, Chapter 3. This chapter completes the narrative, showing how her sacrifice was both a personal tragedy and a catalyst for the Habsburgs' downfall. Her image in Las Meninas, a beacon of humanity amid a dehumanizing system, challenges us to remember the individuals behind political machinations. Their story is a call to protect those who cannot protect themselves. As we reflect on Margarita's life, we see a girl who was never allowed to be more than a pawn, her intelligence and spirit crushed by a dynasty that valued blood over humanity. Her legacy, preserved in Velázquez's masterpiece, is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of overwhelming cruelty. It is also a reminder of our collective responsibility to challenge systems that sacrifice innocence for power, ensuring that the golden-haired child gazing from the canvas is not forgotten, her tragedy a beacon for a more compassionate future. Chapter 5. The Eternal Witness in Las Meninas. The tragic life of Margarita Teresa, as traced through her childhood in Madrid's Alcazar Palace, her harrowing marriage in Vienna, and her death at 21, culminated in a chilling indifference from the Habsburg courts, as explored in Chapter 4. Her passing in 1673, after a life of relentless reproductive demands, marked not only the end of a personal tragedy, but also a turning point in the decline of the Habsburg dynasty, whose obsession with bloodline purity led to genetic ruin in the War of Spanish Succession. Yet Margarita's story transcends the cold pragmatism of her era, living on as a powerful symbol of the human cost of absolute power. This final chapter delves into the enduring legacy of Margarita Teresa, focusing on her immortalization in Diego Velázquez's Las Meninas, the cultural and philosophical reverberations of her life, and the lessons her tragedy offers for modern society. Through the painting's haunting gaze in the historical record, Margarita emerges as an eternal witness to the cruelty of dynastic ambition. Her story a call to protect the vulnerable from systems that exploit innocence for power. The Immortal Child in Las Meninas. Diego Velázquez's Las Meninas, introduced in Chapter 1 as a masterpiece of Western art, stands as the most enduring monument to Margarita Teresa's humanity. Painted around 1656 when she was 5, the work captures her at the only moment in her life when she was free from the crushing weight of dynastic expectations. As described in Chapter 2, the painting portrays a luminous child, her golden curls and elaborate gown radiating innocence, her direct gaze engaging the viewer with a mix of curiosity and melancholy. By Chapter 3, this innocence was shattered by her marriage to Leopold I and the brutal cycle of pregnancies, and Chapter 4 revealed how her death was met with callous indifference, her value reduced to her failure to produce a male heir. Yet in Las Meninas, Margarita remains untouched by this tragedy, her image a defiant assertion of her individuality against the system that sought to erase it. The painting's genius lies in its ability to transcend the political context of its creation. Velázquez, a court painter with intimate access to the royal family, crafted a composition that is both a portrait of power and a subtle critique of its artificiality. Margarita stands at the center, surrounded by maids of honor, dwarves, and a dog, yet she appears isolated, her gaze directed outward as if seeking connection beyond the confines of the court. The mirror in the background, reflecting the unseen King Philip IV and Queen Mariana, suggests a world where appearances are manipulated for political ends, a theme that resonates with Margarita's life as a carefully curated diplomatic asset. Art historians have long debated the painting's meaning, with some interpreting it as a meditation on the isolation of royalty, the child trapped in a gilded cage, a metaphor that Chapters 2 and 3 brought to life through her tightly controlled childhood and alienating marriage. For modern viewers, Las Meninas is a haunting experience, Margarita's gaze imbued with a poignancy deepened by knowledge of her fate. Standing before the canvas in Madrid's Prado Museum, one feels her eyes piercing the centuries, as if she is bearing witness to her own tragedy. This effect, noted in Chapter 4, transforms the painting into a memorial, preserving the memory of a girl whose potential was crushed by dynastic ambition. Unlike the Habsburg courts, which valued her only for her reproductive function, Velázquez saw her as a person, his brushstrokes capturing a spark of intelligence and vitality that the system sought to extinguish. This artistic immortality, a stark contrast to her historical erasure, offers a form of posthumous justice, ensuring that Margarita is remembered not as a failed empress, but as a child of profound humanity. Cultural reverberations. A symbol of human cost. Margarita's story, though quickly forgotten by the Habsburg courts as detailed in Chapter 4, became a powerful symbol for later generations critiquing the excesses of absolute monarchy. Enlightenment philosophers, writing in the century following her death, seized upon the Habsburgs' inbreeding as evidence of the irrationality of divine right rule. Figures like Voltaire, in his scathing essays on monarchy, and Rousseau, in his calls for individual liberty, pointed to the dynasty's genetic disasters, epitomized by Margarita's suffering and Charles II's disabilities, as proof that systems prioritizing lineage over humanity were doomed to fail. Margarita's life, reduced to a series of pregnancies at 14, became a case study in the dehumanization of royal women, her tragedy fueling arguments for more humane approaches to governance and marriage. The Habsburgs' collapse, accelerated by the policies that killed Margarita, challenged the myth of divine monarchy. As noted in Chapter 4, Charles II's inability to rule effectively or produce heirs led to the War of Spanish Succession, a conflict that ended Habsburg rule in Spain and exposed the dynasty's weaknesses. Margarita's death, a precursor to this collapse, undermined the claim that royal blood was inherently superior. Her failure to produce a viable male heir a stark reminder of the genetic toll of inbreeding. Enlightenment thinkers used her story to advocate for rational governance, arguing that political systems based on superstition and exploitation were fundamentally flawed, a legacy that continues to shape modern democratic ideals. Beyond philosophy, Margarita's tragedy influenced artistic and literary representations of royalty. Writers and painters of the 18th and 19th centuries, inspired by tales of Habsburg excess, created works that portrayed royal women as victims of political machinations. Novels like Alexandre Dumas' historical romances and paintings like Francisco Goya's later royal portraits echoed the themes of Las Meninas, depicting monarchs as human beings trapped by their roles. Margarita's story, though not always named, became a cultural archetype, a symbol of the innocent sacrificed to power. Her life, a cautionary tale that resonated through European art and literature. Scientific insights. The genetic tragedy. Modern science has illuminated the biological cost of the Habsburgs' marriage policies, providing a chilling context for Margarita's suffering. As mentioned in Chapter 4, genetic studies of Habsburg remains, particularly those of Charles II, reveal a level of inbreeding so severe that it caused widespread congenital defects. Margarita, born of an uncle-niece marriage and wed to her uncle, carried a concentrated genetic legacy that increased the risk of stillbirths and disabilities in her offspring. Her 6 pregnancies, detailed in Chapter 3, resulted in only one surviving child, Maria Antonia, who inherited the same frailties and died young after her own difficult pregnancies. Geneticists estimate that the Habsburgs' inbreeding coefficient, a measure of genetic relatedness, was among the highest in recorded history, rivaling that of siblings in some cases. This led to a phenomenon known as inbreeding depression, where recessive genetic disorders like the Habsburg jaw and neurological impairments became increasingly common. Margarita's miscarriages and stillbirths, described in Chapter 3, were likely a direct result of these genetic issues, her body unable to sustain healthy pregnancies under the strain of such compromised DNA. Her daughter, Maria Antonia, and grandson, Joseph Ferdinand, continued this tragic pattern, their early deaths underscoring the futility of the Habsburgs' quest for bloodline purity. These scientific insights, unavailable in Margarita's time, highlight the preventable nature of her suffering. Court physicians, as noted in Chapter 2, were aware of the dangers of inbreeding but remained silent, their silence complicit in the dynasty's self-destruction. Modern medicine, with its understanding of genetics, offers a stark contrast to the superstition and xenophobia that justified Habsburg marriages, reinforcing the Enlightenment critique of irrational traditions. Margarita's story, viewed through the scientific lens, becomes a powerful argument for evidence-based decision-making, a reminder that ignorance and dogma can exact a devastating human toll. a universal warning. Protecting the vulnerable. Margarita Teresa's life, as chronicled through her childhood, marriage, death, and aftermath, is a microcosm of systemic abuse, a theme woven through chapters 1 to 4. From her grooming in the Alcazar to her death in Vienna, she was denied agency, her body subjected to invasive examinations and her spirit crushed by relentless expectations. The Habsburgs' marriage policies, sanctified by religion and law, were a form of institutionalized violence, exploiting young women under the guise of divine necessity. Margarita's story, though rooted in the 17th century, resonates with modern issues of child exploitation, forced marriage, and systemic dehumanization. Today, millions of children, particularly girls, face similar violations of their autonomy, whether through child marriage, trafficking, or forced labor. Organizations like UNICEF report that over 12 million girls are married before age 18 each year, many subjected to early pregnancies that mirror Margarita's suffering. Her story, linked to these contemporary struggles, underscores the need for global efforts to protect vulnerable populations, ensuring that no child is treated as a commodity for political or economic gain. The Habsburgs' collapse, driven by the policies that killed Margarita, proves the self-destructive nature of such systems, their legacy a warning that exploitation leads to ruin. Margarita's tragedy also challenges us to examine the subtler forms of exploitation in modern society. From the pressure on young athletes to sacrifice their childhoods for glory to the commodification of children in media, her story prompts reflection on how adult ambitions can harm the young. Her life, reduced to a series of reproductive demands, is a call to prioritize the well-being of children over societal goals, a principle that remains urgently relevant in a world where power imbalances persist. The Eternal Witness, a call to action. In Las Meninas, Margarita Teresa gazes across the centuries, her eyes a silent testament to the capacity of human systems to destroy the very people they claim to serve. As introduced in Chapter 1, the painting captures her at her most human, a child full of potential. Chapters 2 and 3 showed how this potential was crushed by a childhood of control and a marriage of sacrifice, while Chapter 4 revealed the broader consequences of her death, from the Habsburgs' decline to the Enlightenment's critique of monarchy. This final chapter completes her narrative, positioning her as an eternal witness whose story demands action. The painting's enduring popularity, drawing millions to the Prado Museum, ensures that Margarita's humanity outlives the empire that consumed her. Each viewer who meets her gaze is confronted with the tragedy of her life, a silent protest against the reduction of individuals to political tools. This effect, noted in Chapter 4, transforms Las Meninas into a call to action, urging us to challenge systems that sacrifice innocence for power. Whether in the context of 17th century monarchy or 21st century exploitation, Margarita's legacy is a reminder that no political goal justifies the destruction of human dignity. Her story also celebrates the power of art to preserve humanity in the face of dehumanization. Velázquez, by capturing Margarita's individuality, defied the Habsburgs' view of her as a commodity, his work a beacon of resistance that Chapters 1 and 2 foreshadowed. This artistic legacy, combined with the historical record, ensures that Margarita is remembered not as a failed empress, but as a symbol of resilience, her suffering a catalyst for reflection and change. Conclusion. Honoring Margarita's memory. Margarita Teresa's life, from the golden-haired child in Las Meninas to the broken Empress of Vienna, is a testament to the cruelty of dynastic ambition and the resilience of the human spirit. Her story, woven through chapters 1 to 4, illuminates the horrors of a system that treated children as pawns. Her death, a turning point in the Habsburgs' decline. Yet through Las Meninas, she achieves a form of immortality, her gaze a permanent reminder of the individual behind the political machinations. Honoring Margarita's memory means more than mourning her tragedy. It means acting to prevent similar injustices. Her legacy, as an eternal witness to the cost of power, challenges us to protect the vulnerable, to question systems that exploit, and to value humanity over ambition. As we stand before Las Meninas, we meet a child who deserved better. Her story a call to build a world where innocence is cherished, not sacrificed. Margarita Teresa, through Velázquez's masterpiece, speaks to us across the centuries. Her voice a plea for compassion in a world too often ruled by power. Chapter 6. From Tragedy to Transformation. The haunting gaze of Margarita Teresa in Diego Velázquez's Las Meninas, as explored in Chapter 5, transcends the canvas to immortalize her as a symbol of humanity crushed by dynastic ambition. Her life, chronicled from the gilded cage of Madrid's Alcazar, Chapter 2, through the brutal demands of her marriage in Vienna, Chapter 3, to her tragic death at 21, Chapter 4, exposed the Habsburgs' obsession with bloodline purity as a self-destructive force that contributed to their downfall. Chapter 5 positioned Margarita as an eternal witness, her story resonating through Enlightenment critiques, scientific insights, and modern reflections on child exploitation. This final chapter extends her legacy into a transformative narrative, exploring how her tragedy inspires action to prevent similar injustices. By examining her influence on historical reform, contemporary advocacy, and the power of art to drive change, this chapter transforms Margarita's suffering into a catalyst for a more compassionate world, ensuring her voice continues to shape our collective responsibility to protect the vulnerable. The historical ripple effect. Reforming royal marriage practices. Margarita Teresa's life, as detailed in chapters 3 and 4, was a stark illustration of the human cost of the Habsburgs' incestuous marriage policies. Her death in 1673, after 6 pregnancies and countless miscarriages, was not an isolated tragedy, but a symptom of a broader systemic failure that, as noted in Chapter 4, culminated in the War of Spanish Succession and the end of Habsburg rule in Spain. The genetic disasters of inbreeding, epitomized by her half-brother Charles II's disabilities and her daughter Maria Antonia's early death, forced European monarchies to confront the consequences of their marriage strategies, a process that Margarita's story indirectly catalyzed. In the decades following her death, European royal houses began to shift away from extreme inbreeding, a change driven by both practical necessity and Enlightenment ideals. The Bourbons, who ascended the Spanish throne after the War of Spanish Succession, and other dynasties like the Hohenzollerns in Prussia, increasingly sought marriages with more distant relatives or foreign nobility. These unions, while still politically motivated, reduced the genetic risks that had plagued the Habsburgs, as discussed in Chapter 5's Scientific Analysis. The decline of the Habsburgs' prestige, accelerated by their inability to produce viable heirs, served as a warning to other courts, with Margarita's suffering, though not explicitly cited, lurking in the background as a cautionary tale. This shift was not immediate, nor was it driven by humanitarian concern alone. Political alliances remained paramount, but the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason, as noted in Chapter 5, challenged the superstition that justified inbreeding. Treatises on governance, like those by Montesquieu, advocated for rational policies that prioritized stability over dynastic purity, implicitly critiquing practices that led to tragedies like Margarita's. By the 18th century, royal marriages were more likely to balance diplomatic goals with biological pragmatism, a subtle but significant reform that spared future generations the physical and emotional toll endured by Margarita and her daughter. Margarita's indirect influence on these changes underscores the transformative potential of her story. Her life, sacrificed to a flawed system, contributed to a broader reckoning that reshaped European monarchy, aligning with Chapter 4's discussion of the Habsburgs' decline. While she had no voice in her lifetime, her tragedy spoke to future generations, urging a reevaluation of practices that treated individuals as pawns. The power of art, Las Meninas as a catalyst for change. Velázquez's Las Meninas, central to Margarita's legacy in Chapters 1 and 5, is more than a historical artifact. It is a dynamic force for transformation. The painting's portrayal of Margarita as a vibrant, intelligent child, contrasted with the tragedy detailed in Chapters 3 and 4, evokes a visceral response that transcends time. As millions stand before the canvas in the Prado Museum, they encounter not just a masterpiece but a call to action, a theme introduced in Chapter 5 and expanded here. The painting's ability to humanize Margarita, defying the Habsburgs' reduction of her to a reproductive tool, makes it a powerful tool for advocacy, inspiring efforts to protect the vulnerable. Art historians have long noted the painting's subversive quality, as discussed in Chapter 5. Velázquez's composition, with Margarita's gaze piercing the viewer and the mirror reflecting an unseen royal presence, critiques the artificiality of court life. This critique aligns with the Enlightenment's challenge to absolute monarchy, positioning Las Meninas as a visual manifesto against dehumanizing systems. In the 19th century, as Romanticism emphasized individual emotion, the painting inspired artists and writers to explore themes of innocence betrayed, with works like Victor Hugo's novels echoing Margarita's plight. Today, Las Meninas continues to influence contemporary art, with reinterpretations by artists like Pablo Picasso highlighting its enduring relevance. The painting's impact extends beyond aesthetics to social advocacy. Exhibitions featuring Las Meninas often include educational programs that explore Margarita's life, linking her story to modern issues like child marriage and exploitation, as noted in Chapter 5. Museums and cultural institutions use the painting as a platform to raise awareness, partnering with organizations like UNICEF to highlight the plight of millions of girls forced into roles akin to Margarita's. By humanizing a historical figure, Las Meninas bridges the gap between past and present, transforming Margarita's tragedy into a rallying cry for change. This transformative power aligns with Chapter 5's portrayal of Margarita as an eternal witness. Her gaze in the painting is not passive but active, demanding accountability from viewers. By preserving her humanity, Velázquez created a legacy that outlives the Habsburgs, ensuring that Margarita's suffering inspires action rather than mere pity. This artistic influence underscores the role of culture in driving reform, a theme that connects her story to broader movements for justice. Contemporary advocacy. Lessons from Margarita's life. Margarita's story as a victim of institutionalized abuse, Chapters 3 and 4, resonates with contemporary efforts to protect children from exploitation. The Habsburgs' treatment of her groomed from childhood, subjected to invasive examinations, and forced into early pregnancies, parallels modern forms of child abuse, such as forced marriage and trafficking. Chapter 5 highlighted the global scale of these issues, with over 12 million girls married before 18 annually. This chapter explores how Margarita's legacy informs advocacy, transforming her tragedy into a blueprint for action. Organizations like Plan International and Girls Not Brides draw inspiration from historical cases like Margarita's to advocate for legal and cultural changes. In countries where child marriage remains prevalent, such as Niger and Bangladesh, these groups push for laws raising the minimum marriage age and programs empowering girls through education. Margarita's life, reduced to a series of reproductive demands at 14, underscores the urgency of these efforts, her suffering a reminder of the physical and psychological toll of early marriage. Campaigns often use historical narratives to humanize statistics, with Margarita's story serving as a poignant example of what happens when children are treated as commodities. Education is a key focus of modern advocacy, reflecting the denial of Margarita's intellectual potential described in Chapter 2. Programs like Malala Fund emphasize girls' right to learn, countering the utilitarian education Margarita received, which prioritized her role as a bride over her personal growth. By ensuring girls have access to schooling, these initiatives break the cycle of exploitation, offering a path to agency that Margarita was denied. Her story, as a girl of remarkable intelligence stifled by dynastic demands, fuels these efforts. Her unrealized potential a call to invest in the futures of millions. Healthcare reform is another area where Margarita's legacy resonates. Her death from complications of early pregnancy, detailed in Chapter 3, highlights the dangers of adolescent childbirth, a leading cause of death for girls in developing countries. Organizations like the World Health Organization advocate for improved maternal care and policies delaying pregnancy until adulthood, drawing on historical cases to illustrate the risks. Margarita's 6 pregnancies, undertaken under medieval medical practices, serve as a stark contrast to modern standards, reinforcing the need for evidence-based health care to prevent similar tragedies. These advocacy efforts transform Margarita's suffering into a force for good, aligning with Chapter 5's call to action. By linking her story to contemporary struggles, advocates ensure her legacy is not confined to the past, but actively shapes a more equitable future. Her tragedy becomes a catalyst for systemic change, challenging societies to prioritize the rights and well-being of children over cultural or political imperatives. Reimagining Margarita, a feminist perspective. Margarita's story, as a woman stripped of agency, invites a feminist reinterpretation that amplifies her legacy. Chapters 3 and 4 depicted her as a victim of patriarchal structures, her body controlled by male-dominated courts, and her voice silenced by dynastic necessity. A feminist lens, building on Chapter 5's discussion of systemic abuse, reclaims Margarita as a symbol of resistance, her endurance under unimaginable pressure a testament to female strength. Feminist historians argue that women like Margarita, though powerless in their lifetimes, shaped history through their resilience. Her ability to navigate the Austrian court's demands, maintain her dignity, and forge connections with her Spanish retainers, as noted in Chapter 3, reflects a quiet agency that defied her role as a passive pawn. By surviving 6 pregnancies and raising a daughter under such conditions, she demonstrated a strength that the Habsburgs failed to acknowledge, her life a challenge to the narrative of female disposability. Contemporary feminist movements draw parallels between Margarita's story and modern struggles for bodily autonomy. Issues like reproductive rights and gender-based violence echo her experience of being reduced to her biological function, as described in Chapter 3. Activists use her story to highlight the historical roots of these struggles, arguing that the fight for women's rights is a continuation of battles fought by figures like Margarita, whose suffering laid bare the costs of patriarchy. Her legacy, reimagined as a feminist icon, inspires campaigns for equality, ensuring her story empowers rather than merely mourns. This feminist perspective transforms Margarita from a victim to a beacon of resilience, aligning with Chapter 5's portrayal of her as an eternal witness. By reclaiming her narrative, feminists honor her humanity, ensuring her legacy contributes to a world where women and girls are valued for their agency, not their utility. A global call to action. Margarita Teresa's legacy, woven through Chapters 1 to 5, is a global call to action, urging societies to confront systems that exploit the vulnerable. Her life, from the Alcazar's gilded cage to Vienna's brutal court, illuminates the dangers of prioritizing power over humanity, a theme that resonates across centuries. Chapter 5 positioned her as a symbol of this struggle, and this chapter extends her influence into a transformative agenda, linking her story to historical reform, artistic advocacy, and contemporary activism. The Habsburgs' collapse, driven by the policies that killed Margarita, proves that systems built on exploitation are unsustainable, a lesson that applies to modern challenges like climate change, economic inequality, and human rights abuses. Her story, as a child sacrificed for dynastic ambition, challenges us to prioritize the well-being of future generations, ensuring that no one is treated as a means to an end. By learning from her tragedy, we can build a world where innocence is protected, not commodified. Las Meninas, as the enduring vessel of Margarita's legacy, remains a powerful catalyst for this transformation. Its ability to humanize a historical figure, as discussed in Chapters 1 and 5, inspires action, from museum programs raising awareness to grassroots movements, fighting child exploitation. Margarita's gaze, piercing and unyielding, demands accountability. Her story, a reminder that history is not a passive record, but a call to shape the future. Conclusion: a legacy of light in darkness. Margarita Teresa's life, from the radiant child in Las Meninas to the broken Empress of Vienna, is a testament to the cruelty of dynastic power and the resilience of the human spirit. Chapters 2 through 5 traced her journey, from a childhood of control to a marriage of sacrifice, a death met with indifference, and a legacy enduring through art and advocacy. This final chapter transforms her tragedy into a force for change, showing how her story reshaped royal practices, inspired cultural critique, and fuels modern activism. Honoring Margarita means more than preserving her memory. It means acting to prevent similar injustices. Her legacy, as an eternal witness in Las Meninas, challenges us to protect the vulnerable, to challenge exploitative systems, and to value humanity over ambition. As we meet her gaze in the Prado Museum, we encounter a child whose suffering was not in vain. Her story, a beacon guiding us toward a world where no one is sacrificed for power. Margarita Teresa, through Velázquez's masterpiece and the enduring power of her narrative, speaks to us across the centuries. Her voice, a clarion call for compassion, justice, and transformation. Chapter 7. The Legacy That Shapes Tomorrow. Margarita Teresa's tragic life, immortalized in Diego Velázquez's Las Meninas and chronicled through her suffocating childhood, brutal marriage, and untimely death, found transformative power in Chapter 6, where her story inspired reforms in royal marriage practices, fueled advocacy against child exploitation, and became a feminist symbol of resilience. From the Alcazar's Gilded Cage, Chapter 2, to Vienna's relentless court, Chapter 3, her sacrifice exposed the Habsburgs' self-destructive obsession with bloodline purity, contributing to their decline, Chapter 4, and resonating through Enlightenment critiques and modern activism, Chapters 5 and 6. This final chapter envisions Margarita's legacy as a living force shaping a more just future. By exploring her influence on global human rights frameworks, educational initiatives, and the evolving role of art in social justice, this chapter transforms her tragedy into a blueprint for systemic change, ensuring her gaze in Las Meninas continues to inspire action to protect the vulnerable and challenge exploitative power structures. A beacon for global human rights. Margarita Teresa's life, as a child stripped of agency and reduced to a dynastic tool, Chapters 2 and 3, mirrors the experiences of millions denied their fundamental rights. Chapter 6 highlighted her influence on advocacy against child marriage and exploitation, but her legacy extends to the broader human rights movement, where her story serves as a historical touchstone for protecting the vulnerable. The Habsburgs' treatment of Margarita groomed for marriage, subjected to invasive examinations, and forced into deadly pregnancies. Chapters 2 and 3. Parallels modern violations like forced labor, human trafficking, and gender-based violence, making her a symbol for global justice. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, a cornerstone of modern human rights law, emphasizes the inherent dignity of all individuals, a principle violated by the Habsburgs' commodification of Margarita. Her story, though centuries old, informs contemporary frameworks like the Convention on the Rights of the Child, 1989, which protects children from exploitation and ensures their right to education, health, and safety. Advocacy groups such as Human Rights Watch use historical cases to contextualize current struggles, citing figures like Margarita to illustrate the long history of child abuse sanctioned by power. Her life, reduced to a series of reproductive demands at 14, Chapter 3, underscores the need for enforceable laws to prevent such abuses, from child marriage bans to protections against forced labor. Regional human rights frameworks like the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child draw similar inspiration. In regions where cultural practices perpetuate early marriage, Margarita's suffering detailed in Chapter 3's account of her pregnancies resonates as a warning of the physical and psychological toll. Grassroots movements, supported by organizations like Save the Children, use her story in educational campaigns, humanizing the statistics of 12 million girls married annually. Chapter 5. By linking her tragedy to modern policy, her legacy shapes legal and social reforms, ensuring children are treated as rights bearers, not property. This influence aligns with Chapter 6's vision of Margarita as a catalyst for change. Her story, a historical precedent for human rights violations, galvanizes efforts to create a world where no child faces her fate, transforming her suffering into a foundation for global justice. Her legacy as an eternal witness, Chapter 5, demands accountability from governments and societies, urging them to uphold the dignity she was denied. Education as liberation, breaking the cycle. Margarita's childhood, as described in Chapter 2, was a travesty of education. Her intelligence harnessed not for personal growth, but to prepare her as a diplomatic asset. Her lessons in languages and etiquette, designed to make her a suitable bride, Chapter 2, contrast sharply with the transformative potential of education today. Chapter 6 noted how advocacy groups like Malala Fund draw on her story to promote girls' education, and this chapter expands on her influence as a symbol for breaking the cycle of exploitation through learning. Education is a powerful tool for empowerment, offering girls the agency Margarita was denied. Programs like UNESCO's Global Education Coalition prioritize access for marginalized groups, particularly girls in regions where early marriage is prevalent. Margarita's unrealized potential, her quick mind stifled by dynastic demands, Chapter 2, serves as a rallying cry for these initiatives, her story illustrating the cost of denying children intellectual freedom. In countries like India and Ethiopia, where child marriage rates remain high, community-based education programs use historical narratives to engage families, with Margarita's tragedy highlighting the dangers of prioritizing tradition over a child's future. Teacher training programs, supported by organizations like Teach for All, incorporate historical case studies to foster empathy and critical thinking. Educators use Margarita's life to teach students about gender inequality and the historical roots of human rights, linking her story to contemporary issues like gender-based violence. This approach, rooted in Chapter 5's discussion of her cultural impact, transforms classrooms into spaces for social change, ensuring young people understand the systemic forces that shaped Margarita's fate and their responsibility to challenge similar injustices. Higher education also reflects her influence. Gender studies and history curricula, particularly in European universities, analyze figures like Margarita to explore the intersection of power, gender, and exploitation. Her life as a victim of institutionalized abuse, Chapter 4, informs research on patriarchal structures, with scholars citing her as a case study in the commodification of women. These academic efforts, building on Chapter 6's feminist reinterpretation, ensure her story shapes future leaders, fostering a commitment to equity and justice. By inspiring educational reform, Margarita's legacy liberates future generations from the constraints she endured. Her story, a testament to the power of knowledge denied, aligns with Chapter 6's call to transform tragedy into action, ensuring education becomes a tool for empowerment rather than control. The evolving role of art in social justice Las Meninas, central to Margarita's legacy in Chapters 1, 5, and 6, is a timeless advocate for social justice. Its portrayal of her humanity a counterpoint to the Habsburgs' dehumanization. Chapter 6 explored its influence on cultural advocacy, and this chapter delves into its evolving role in modern social justice movements, where art serves as a catalyst for awareness and action. Margarita's gaze, piercing and accusatory, continues to inspire artists, activists, and institutions to challenge systemic inequalities, ensuring her story drives change. Contemporary artists draw on Las Meninas to address issues of exploitation and power. Installations like those by Yinka Schonibert, which reimagine historical portraits to critique colonialism and gender oppression, echo Velázquez's subversive composition. These works, inspired by the painting's critique of court artificiality, Chapter 5, use Margarita's image to highlight the plight of marginalized groups, from child brides to refugees. Art collectives, such as Guerrilla Girls, incorporate her story into performances that expose gender inequality, linking her commodification to modern struggles for bodily autonomy. Museums play a critical role in this advocacy, using Las Meninas as a platform for dialogue. The Prado Museum, where the painting resides, hosts exhibitions that contextualize Margarita's life, with guided tours and digital content exploring her tragedy in relation to human rights. Interactive exhibits, supported by augmented reality, allow visitors to engage with her story, from her childhood, Chapter 2, to her death, Chapter 3, fostering empathy and action. Partnerships with NGOs like Amnesty International amplify these efforts, using the painting to fundraise for programs protecting children from exploitation. Social media has expanded the painting's reach, with hashtags like Bauresh, Las Meninas Legacy connecting global audiences to Margarita's story. Activists share her image alongside narratives of modern child exploitation, drawing parallels to her forced marriage and pregnancies, Chapter 3. This digital advocacy, rooted in Chapter 6's discussion of cultural impact, transforms Las Meninas into a viral symbol of resistance, ensuring Margarita's voice reaches millions. By leveraging art's emotional power, these campaigns bridge historical and contemporary struggles, making her legacy a catalyst for global solidarity. This evolving role of art aligns with Chapter 6's vision of Las Meninas as a transformative force. Margarita's image, a silent protest against her dehumanization, inspires a new generation of activists, ensuring her tragedy fuels efforts to dismantle exploitative systems, building a compassionate future. Margarita's legacy, as a symbol of resilience and a call to action, offers a blueprint for a compassionate future. Chapters 4 and 5 highlighted the Habsburgs' collapse as proof that exploitative systems are unsustainable, and Chapter 6 extended this lesson to modern advocacy. This chapter envisions a world shaped by her story, where policies and cultures prioritize the dignity of the vulnerable, ensuring no child faces her fate. Global governance must reflect this vision, with international bodies like the United Nations strengthening protections for children. The Sustainable Development Goals, particularly those addressing gender equality and education, draw inspiration from historical injustices like Margarita's, ensuring resources reach the most marginalized. Her story, a reminder of the cost of unchecked power, Chapter 4, urges leaders to prioritize human rights over political expediency, fostering a world where agency is universal. Cultural shifts are equally critical. Media campaigns inspired by Las Meninas, Chapter 6, challenge narratives that normalize child exploitation, promoting stories of empowerment instead. Community leaders, from religious figures to influencers, use Margarita's tragedy to advocate for change, encouraging families to value education over early marriage. These efforts, grounded in Chapter 5's call to protect the vulnerable, create a cultural ethos that rejects commodification, ensuring children are seen as individuals with inherent worth. Technology offers new tools for this transformation. Artificial intelligence, used ethically, can identify at-risk children through data analysis, preventing cases like Margarita's forced marriage, Chapter 3. Blockchain-based systems ensure aid reaches child protection programs transparently, addressing the systemic failures that enabled her exploitation. Chapter 4. These innovations, inspired by her legacy, align with Chapter 6's vision of systemic change, harnessing technology to protect the vulnerable. Conclusion: A voice that echoes forever. Margarita Teresa's life, from the radiant child in Las Meninas, Chapter 1, to the broken Empress of Vienna, Chapter 3, is a testament to the cruelty of dynastic ambition and the power of human resilience. Her story, woven through her controlled childhood, Chapter 2, tragic death, Chapter 4, and enduring legacy, Chapters 5 and 6, transforms a personal tragedy into a global call for justice. This final chapter envisions her influence as a living force, shaping human rights, education, art, and policy to create a world where innocence is protected. Her gaze in Las Meninas, piercing across centuries, is a voice that echoes forever, demanding accountability and compassion. By honoring her legacy, we commit to a future where no child is sacrificed for power, where education liberates, art inspires, and justice prevails. Margarita Teresa, through Velázquez's masterpiece and the enduring power of her narrative, stands as a beacon of hope. Her tragedy a catalyst for a world where every child can shine as brightly as she did in that fleeting moment of innocence.